Welcome, traveler of dreams. Tonight's Thanksgiving stories drift in like a cold draft under the door. Before we get started, remember to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss future horror stories like these. Also, let me know where you are watching from, so go ahead and leave a comment. Let's begin. Mom reached out 3 times that week, reminding me about Thanksgiving dinner, as if I might forget after spending 36 straight years showing up at the same split-level home in northern Wisconsin. Ever since my divorce was finalized in September, she had been unusually focused on family events, probably worried I'd spend the holiday alone in my cramped studio eating cheap takeout. Dad had left the manufacturing plant earlier that spring, and according to her, he'd been spending retirement drinking and building little wooden projects no one needed, mostly bird feeders overflowing in the garage. Uncle Marty planned to come too, Dad's younger brother who ran a heating repair business a few towns away and loved drinking Dad's beer while complaining that younger generations were destroying the trades. Pulling into the driveway that afternoon, I noticed the faded Timberwolves flag hanging from the porch, its colors nearly washed out, and inside the kitchen window, the fogged glass told me Mom had been cooking all morning. Same every single year. Dad greeted me with a can of Bud Light. The way he leaned against the doorway confirmed it wasn't his first. Uncle Marty's booming laugh spilled from the living room where the parade flickered across the screen. My sister Rachel had already taken command of the kitchen with Mom, while her husband Kyle chased their twins around the furniture as they shrieked and launched couch cushions like weapons. Rachel shot me a look that said she'd been drowning in the chaos since sunrise, stirring gravy while Mom checked the turkey for the 100th time. Their movements were rehearsed, almost choreographed. The house smelled like childhood sage, butter, that specific holiday coffee blend Mom always bought, and I cracked open a beer before sinking into my old dent in the couch while Dad and Marty argued about whether Minnesota had any shot at the playoffs. Kyle finally wrangled the twins with a promise of pie, and we all shifted toward the dining table where Mom had set out Grandma's old china, the plates rimmed with delicate painted roses. Halfway through dinner, right as Kyle was telling a story about a client trying to pay him in cryptocurrency, Dad shoved back his chair and muttered something about needing more beer from the garage. Marty followed him, which felt off since he still had half of his own drink untouched, but no one noticed, too absorbed in Kyle's impression of the crypto guy explaining blockchain. The twins were now flinging mashed potatoes, and Rachel had abandoned the effort to control them, holding her wine glass safely away from flying food while Mom strategically ignored the growing disaster on her carpet. Through the kitchen doorway, Dad and Marty's voices drifted back, first low, then louder over the clink of bottles, though Kyle's story and the kids' noise made it impossible to hear. Mom kept glancing toward the kitchen, her smile strained, slicing her turkey into progressively smaller pieces without actually eating. The voices shifted from conversation to something sharp. Dad slurred his words while Marty's tone hardened to something fierce. Kyle cut off mid-sentence, and even the twins froze, potato-covered spoons poised in the air. When everyone turned toward the kitchen, Mom set down her fork with slow precision, rising just enough before Marty's voice punched through the room like a snapped wire. "You really think they'll never find out what you did to him?" Silence hit the table like a physical force, and Dad stumbled back into the room with a face drained of all color, while Marty stood behind him, fists clenched. No one spoke, no one blinked. I watched a small streak of gravy slide down the wall, the only movement in a suddenly suffocating room. "What are you talking about?" Rachel's voice shook as she stared at Dad like she was seeing a stranger. Kyle pulled the twins onto his side of the bench. Dad opened and closed his mouth, reaching for his chair and missing. Marty stepped fully into the dining room, his work boots leaving mud stains on Mom's white carpet, dark smudges that looked almost symbolic, like clues at a scene none of us understood yet. "Go on, Jim," Marty said, voice steady now, nothing like the earlier drunken rambling. "Tell them about the Burrows, boy. Tell them what happened that summer." Mom made a sound, half gasp, half something else, and touched her throat where she normally wore her pearl necklace, though she hadn't put it on today. Dad finally managed to speak, but it came out raw and pleading. He accused Marty of being drunk, insisted he didn't know what he was talking about, but his gaze darted everywhere except toward us. I remembered the Burrows kid, Ethan Burrows, who lived a few blocks away and vanished the summer I turned 10. Search teams combed the woods behind the middle school, his face stapled to telephone poles for months until the rain shredded them. Marty laughed, but it came out bitter, acidic, drunk, maybe, But not so drunk I didn't notice what you were burning in that metal barrel last week. Not drunk enough to pretend I didn't see things you thought were gone." The twins started crying, confused, frightened, and Kyle was already standing, pulling them toward the doorway while Rachel grabbed coats with frantic automatic movements. "Everyone calm down," Mom said, though her voice cracked on the last word, her grip on the table so tight her knuckles looked like polished stones. Marty shook his head. "No, I'm done being calm. Done carrying this for you, Jim. 26 years I watched you act like the grieving neighbor. 26 years watching you sit in church, pretending you weren't the reason that boy never came home." Dad lunged at him, a clumsy, desperate move Marty easily dodged and crashed into Mom's china cabinet, rattling the plates. I stood, unsure whether to intervene, my legs disconnected from everything happening in front of me. Rachel was gone with her family, cold November air pouring in through the open door, mixing with the smell of spilled wine and untouched turkey. Mom cried silently, tears rolling down her face, and I realized she wasn't shocked, just exhausted, like she'd been anticipating this reckoning for years. "The attic," Marty said, looking straight at me. "Behind the holiday bins, in that old trunk he figured everyone forgot about. He couldn't throw everything away." Dad made a fractured sound and collapsed to the floor, unable to stand. Marty walked past him toward the door, pausing to look at Mom. "I'm sorry, Lillian. I just couldn't watch him teach those boys to fish at that same creek anymore. Couldn't pretend." And then he left, the three of us trapped in a dining room that felt more like a sealed crime scene. The untouched china looked like props in a play no one wanted to continue. I don't remember choosing to go upstairs, but suddenly, I was pulling down the attic ladder, the hinges shrieking like they always had. Mom followed behind, moving as if underwater, while Dad stayed below, mumbling incoherently. The attic smelled of dust and old insulation, the air thick enough to taste. Ducking under beams, I used my phone flashlight to navigate through boxes neatly labeled in Mom's handwriting. Baby clothes, wedding, schoolwork. Behind the stack of Christmas decorations sat the steamer trunk Marty had mentioned, layered with so much dust it looked forgotten by time. The leather straps were brittle, the brass buckles green with age. The broken lock made it easy to lift the lid, which moaned softly as it opened. Under a decayed blanket lay what Marty wanted us to see, a single-child sneaker. The red stripe faded, a wallet with cartoon characters on it still holding 3 crumpled dollars, and under a sheet of yellowed plastic, an old newspaper dated July 1999 with the headline, "Local Child Missing. Search Continues." Ethan Burrows' school photo stared up at me, gap-toothed grin and messy hair sticking out in every direction. But beneath the newspaper was the thing that struck hardest. Dad's old work shirt with his embroidered name patch, smeared with a rust-colored stain hardened with age, and entangled in the fibers were several strands of hair lighter than anyone in our family. Mom stood behind me, breathing quick and shallow, and when I looked at her, she seemed to have aged years in minutes. "I always wondered," she whispered, "why he moved Ethan's bike from the garage to the shed that night. Why he spent hours scrubbing his truck even though it wasn't dirty." She reached for the wallet, her hands trembling. "Marty tried to warn me. I just didn't want to believe the man I married, the father of my kids, could—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Sirens approached in the distance, growing louder, and I realized Marty must have called the authorities. 26 years of silence had finally ended. I helped Mom down the attic stairs, both of us moving like our limbs weighed hundreds of pounds. Dad was gone from the dining room, but his keys were still on the counter. He couldn't have gone far, likely hiding in his workshop among the bird feeders and tools he used for things I no longer wanted to imagine. Mom phoned Rachel, steady but hollow, telling her not to return and to take the kids somewhere safe. I could hear Rachel crying on the other end, asking questions Mom didn't answer. Police arrived within minutes, 2 cruisers and an unmarked sedan, and taped off the house. They collected the contents of the trunk as evidence. They found Dad passed out in the workshop, sawdust in his hair, a half-empty bottle beside him. They arrested him while neighbors peeked through curtains, probably assuming it was a drinking incident, having no idea a predator had been living next door. Mom moved in with her sister in Indiana and refused to return to the house. I drove home in a haze, holiday music on the radio sounding like static from another universe. The Burrows family finally received their answers, though answers don't always heal. Dad's trial begins next month, his lawyer already muttering about impaired judgment and the long shadow of addiction. Mom sold the house to a young couple who didn't care about its past, just the good price and quiet street. That faded Timberwolves flag probably still flaps on the porch, untouched and forgotten, as if nothing monstrous had ever happened beneath it. My brother Daniel wouldn't stop checking if I was certain about hosting, even as he stepped into my house balancing 2 pies his wife had baked. Half a year earlier, I'd bought my first place, a modest colonial on a quiet road in Vermont, and Thanksgiving felt like the perfect chance to show everyone I finally had things under control. I was 31, newly single after a rough divorce, but at least I had stone countertops and a dining room big enough for everyone if we didn't mind squeezing a bit. My youngest sister arrived with her trio of kids, and my parents drove down from Rutland with enough wine to outfit a small bistro. By midday, the house was more crowded than it had ever been, warm air steaming the kitchen windows while kids darted through hallways I'd only finished painting a few weeks prior. Family members kept admiring the place, trailing fingers along the trim, poking at the built-in shelves I'd installed myself, and I floated around refilling glasses with an idiotic grin, thrilled to no longer be the brother who'd moved back home after his marriage imploded. The kids begged to check out the backyard, 7 of them in total, from my barely walking nephew to my oldest niece who'd just become a teenager. I unlocked the kitchen door that opened onto the deck, warning them about the slick steps still coated in early frost. They spilled out into the cold in a blur of jackets and boots while I went back to the turkey, reminding them to stay within view of the window. My brother-in-law, Mark, was rambling about his overbearing employer while laughter filled the living room. I was obsessing over whether I'd remembered the butter layer under the turkey skin, the happy noise of family echoing through every room. When the kids rushed back in 20 minutes later, faces red, shoes covered in leaves, I didn't even think to check if the back door had been locked behind them. Dinner went smoother than I'd ever hoped. We extended the table with both leaves, lined folding tables along the ends to make one enormous setup, and my dad carved the turkey while recycling jokes he'd used my entire life. My mom kept popping up to help, even though I told her to relax. Daniel's wife Marissa snapped photos of the whole scene, cheesily insisting she needed proof of my first major hosting gig. The gravy came out flawless, the burned roll bottoms went unmentioned, and even my picky niece took a spoonful of green bean casserole. We shared what we were grateful for, and when it came to me, I said something generic about new chapters and family. What I really meant was that I was grateful they'd trusted me enough to break decades of routine and come here instead of gathering at my parents' house like always. By dessert, darkness had settled outside. Late November does that early, and I turned on every light to keep the cozy atmosphere alive. The kids were getting twitchy, so we sent them out again with flashlights while the adults lingered over coffee. My Aunt Lorraine was on her second glass of wine, already dredging up embarrassing old stories about my dad. I was cutting into our 3rd pumpkin pie when the entire house suddenly went silent. Not just the lights. Every appliance, every hum, everything. The quiet was so jarring, we immediately heard the kids yelling outside, though it sounded like excited shrieks rather than panic. I dug out the heavy metal flashlight I'd bought when I first moved in, trying to feel like a responsible homeowner. Thankfully, the fireplace still burned in the living room, casting jittery orange shadows across everyone's faces as they lifted their phones, except none of them were connecting. Screens lit up, but no service, no Wi-Fi, nothing. It felt like we'd been sealed away from the world. Daniel tried joking about going old school, but there was tension in his voice and Marissa was stressed, trying to call her mom who was babysitting their infant. My dad went to check the breaker box while Mark and I gathered candles from around the house, mostly scented ones meant to make the place smell festive. We did our best to keep the mood cheerful for the kids, now back inside and clustered near the fire, but something heavy lingered in the air, a sense that things were off. That's when I noticed it. I was walking down the hall with an armful of candles when something moved past the window in my study, the room I used as an office where absolutely no one should have been. I first assumed a kid had run in there, maybe bored without their tablets, but all 7 were gathered together in the living room. I double-counted them. Then I glanced back toward the study and saw the door was slightly ajar, even though I knew I'd closed it that morning after hiding wrapped presents inside. I didn't want to alarm anyone or interrupt our first real family gathering at my place. So I walked down the hall, every step louder than I remembered. now that the house wasn't humming with electricity and chatter. The study door had opened wider, maybe half a foot. Through the gap the curtain swayed, though the windows were shut. My desk lamp lay shattered on the floor, the ceramic base crushed into shards that caught the weak hallway light, and the chair was turned toward the closet instead of the desk. But the smell, that's what froze me. Damp soil mixed with something chemical, harsh, almost industrial, completely foreign to the warm sense of food drifting through the rest of the house. I nudged the door open, gripping the flashlight like some kind of weapon, and saw muddy boot prints staining my rug. Heavy steps leading from the window to the desk, then to the closet, where the door sat half open, darkness pooled inside like ink. Daniel found me staring at the closet. One look at my face and he grabbed my arm, dragging me back into the hallway. He'd come searching because Dad wasn't finding the circuit panel. According to him, it looked like someone had pulled the entire fuse panel apart. Fuses missing, slots empty. Daniel and I locked eyes, both reaching the same awful conclusion at the same moment. Then, Marissa screamed. Not a startled sound, something raw and sharp enough to push us running toward the living room. She stood near the fireplace, pointing toward the kitchen doorway, where a man none of us had ever seen stood motionless. He wore a thick canvas coat and mud-caked work boots. His face was lined, weather-beaten, gray stubble shadowing his jaw, and in his hand, dangling casually at his side, was my large carving knife. Time didn't feel real for a moment. Kids smashed together on the couch next to my mom, Dad inching in front of them, Mark grabbing a fire poker. The stranger didn't speak, just breathed with that slow, heavy rise and fall under his stained coat. His jeans were ripped at the knee, and dried blood crusted the tier. His eyes scanned each of us, not frenzied, but calculating, like he was measuring us. Daniel whispered for Marissa to take the kids upstairs, but when she shifted, the man subtly raised the knife to his other hand. That tiny movement locked everyone in place. The firelight reflected on the blade in red glints. His knuckles were scraped open, skin torn like he'd been fighting something or someone before coming here. I tried speaking, asking what he wanted or if he needed help, anything to break that awful silence. Nothing came out. Then my nephew, only 4, started crying, the kind of cry that's pure exhaustion and fear, and it shattered whatever held us still. The man stepped forward. Mark smashed the poker into the wall near him, yelling at him to back off, get out. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Chaos exploded instantly. My sisters dragging kids behind furniture. Aunt Lorraine hurling her wine glass, the red splashing across the white doorframe like blood. The intruder recoiled, not from injury, just from the sheer eruption around him, the knife slipping from his grip as he shielded his face. And that's when I saw the second figure. A younger guy, early 20s, standing at the top of the stairs, watching everything with a blank, hollow stare. He started coming down quickly, 2 steps at a time. Daniel snatched a brass candlestick from the mantel and shouted for him to stop, but he didn't. Dad, 67 with a bad hip, charged the older man, smashing him into the wall hard enough to knock pictures down. They collapsed together, the intruder's head hitting the floor with a crack that sliced through the noise. Mark tackled him, pinning his arms while Dad rolled away, gasping. The younger intruder reached the bottom step. Something inside me snapped months of anger about the divorce, the isolation, everything boiling up. I grabbed him by his flannel shirt and slammed him into the grandfather clock my parents had gifted me. The glass shattered, gears clattering as the pendulum whipped around. I heard yelling, my mom, my sisters, maybe all of them, but my body just moved. Daniel struck the younger man with the candlestick while I held him against the splintered wood until he slumped sideways, blood trickling from his ear. Meanwhile, the older intruder tried to rise again, Mark wrestling him down harder. Then sirens wailed in the distance, sharp, rising, fast. My niece, Tessa, stood near the window with her phone raised. She whispered that she'd found one tiny spot near the glass where she got a single bar just enough to call 911 before losing it again. The older man instantly went still when he heard the sirens, staring at the ceiling with an expression I still can't read. We formed a circle around the two injured men, holding them on the floor until red and blue lights swept across the living room and officers flooded in, shouting commands and turning our Thanksgiving into something that felt like a crime documentary unfolding around us. Later, after ambulances took both men, after police questioned each of us, we learned they were father and son. They'd been stealing from homes during holiday gatherings all season, relying on the distraction of loud families. They'd hit 3 other houses that very day. Police found their van nearby filled with stolen items, some taken from my study before we'd even noticed anything missing, including my laptop, old cufflinks from my wedding, and a bottle of expensive bourbon I'd been saving. The cops said they usually slipped in and out undetected, but must have miscalculated this time. Maybe they got greedy. Maybe they lost track of time. When the power failed and we started moving around, they were trapped inside with us. We refused to stay the night at my place. We went to Daniel's house instead, where the kids buzzed with wild retellings like they'd just lived an action movie. Dad's hip was sore but fine. Mark had cuts across his hands. And I paced for hours, replaying that unlocked door over and over, stunned at how fast a celebration turned vicious. But the strange thing is, the whole ordeal somehow made us closer than we'd ever been. We still celebrate Thanksgiving together, but now we rotate houses and everyone checks the doors 2 or 3 times before sitting down. We joke about Aunt Lorraine's Major League wine throw and how Tessa saved the day with her magical 1-bar signal. We never figured out why the cell service vanished or who cut the power. Police said the intruders denied doing it. Maybe it'll stay a mystery forever. What matters is that we made it through. That my first Thanksgiving in that house became the story we'll always retell. The year we fought back, the year we learned exactly what it means to be family when the world goes dark. I'd been behind the wheel for nearly 6 hours that night, pushing through the long stretch of highway as I tried to reach my brother's place before Thanksgiving morning. My rental sedan buzzed at higher speeds the way cheap compact cars do, and the coffee I'd brought along had slipped from warm to stale long before. The interstate was mostly abandoned, just darkness swallowing the road ahead, interrupted every now and then by a semi blasting past in the opposite lane. Close to midnight, the soft glow of a rest area sign shimmered against the trees, and I figured it would be smart to pull over, stretch, and splash some cold water on my face. When I opened my door, the chill hit me instantly, sharp and metallic, almost like the air carried a faint electrical charge. The place was practically silent. Only one battered pickup sat near the entrance, and across from me a pale utility van rested crookedly with its engine humming steadily. The overhead lamps flickered at uneven intervals, throwing long, thin shadows that crawled across the pavement in strange patterns. I remember thinking it was weird for someone to leave a van running this late, but maybe the driver was napping inside. I brushed off the thought, locked the car, and headed toward the restroom building. As I approached, the vending machines along the wall emitted an unsteady hum, one of those mechanical drones that almost mimics slow breathing if you listen long enough. I stretched my arms, rubbed my neck, and glanced at my phone, barely a single bar. That was when I heard it. Not a scream, not even a call for help, just a muffled sound, like someone trying to stifle their voice. It rose from beyond the fence where the tree line swallowed the dark. My first thought was that maybe somebody's pet had run off, or a couple had wandered out there to argue away from the lights. Then she appeared. A woman emerged barefoot from between the trees, her hair a tangled mess, wearing pajama bottoms and an oversized ash-colored hoodie slipping off one shoulder. She halted the second she noticed me. Her voice cracked when she spoke, rasping and uneven. "Don't look at me. Don't draw attention." I just stared, stunned, trying to make sense of what she meant. Her gaze kept snapping toward the white van, and for a moment I could have sworn something shifted behind the tinted window, just the faintest movement in the dim interior. She kept whispering urgently, insisting I stay quiet. I wanted to ask if she was injured or if someone was chasing her, but the terror in her eyes told me she didn't want anyone noticing her at all. The van's idle throb echoed across the empty lot, steady as a heartbeat. No one sat in the front seats, which made everything feel even stranger. I began stepping backward toward my car, trying to piece together what I was seeing, when she suddenly ducked behind one of the trash cans near the curb. "They'll notice us," she murmured, barely parting her lips. That word, they lodged itself in my mind like a sharp splinter. I turned just enough to look toward the van again. Its passenger door slowly cracked open with a metallic groan, deliberate and unnervingly slow. A sliver of dull interior light spilled onto the pavement, and I glimpsed shapes inside, one, maybe two silhouettes. They weren't speaking, they weren't moving much either. They simply sat there, angled toward me as if waiting. My pulse hammered beneath my skin. I forced myself to walk instead of run, doing everything I could to seem oblivious. Each footstep echoed across the empty rest stop, clattering through the cold quiet like noise in a cavern. Behind me, the van's engine revved. Soft, but enough to make every instinct in me buzz with alarm. I didn't turn around until I'd nearly reached my car. The woman still crouched behind the bin, now covering her mouth with her hand. I unlocked my door and slipped inside, hesitating for one short moment before starting the car. That was when the van's sliding door slammed open, the crash ringing through the still night as sharp and violent as metal striking metal. I didn't turn my head. I didn't want to see who or what climbed out. I floored the accelerator, tires screeching as I shot across the lot. My hands clamped the wheel too tightly, and the engine roared beneath me as I sped down the on-ramp and back onto the highway. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the van's headlights flash on. But they didn't follow, not at first. They just sat there, glowing faintly as the rest stop disappeared behind me. For the next hour, I kept checking the mirror, bracing to see those bright beams appear from the distance. The road remained empty the entire time. I didn't slow down. My GPS mentioned a state patrol station about 20 miles ahead, but I didn't wait that long before dialing 911. The dispatcher kept her voice calm, asking for the nearest mile marker, the van's details, and anything I could say about the woman. I told her everything. The bare feet, the panic in her eyes, the figure sitting still inside the running van. She paused for a few seconds before telling me they'd already received 2 similar calls that night, along that same stretch of highway. One of those calls had ended with a missing person file being opened. By the time I pulled into a bright, loud gas station off the next exit, my hands trembled as I held the phone against my ear. The fluorescent lights and noisy music felt surreal after the suffocating darkness I'd just fled. A trooper showed up within minutes and asked me to point out exactly where the rest area was located. When I mentioned the woman, something in his expression shifted, not shock, more like irritated concern. He said they'd been combing through that region for days. Several travelers had vanished over the past month, all last spotted somewhere between mile markers 2119 and 241. They took my statement and asked me to wait while more officers headed to search the site. Nearly an hour later, one of them came back. He didn't give much away, just said the van had vanished by the time they arrived, and the woman wasn't anywhere on the grounds. They had discovered fresh tire impressions leading onto a narrow dirt path behind the tree line, the kind of trail that wouldn't show up on any map. The officer told me to keep my doors locked if I planned to keep driving that night, then handed me a card with a case number printed on it. I reached my brother's house the next morning, far later than expected, and decided not to mention anything. I didn't sleep after that, and I've refused to take that route again since. A few weeks after Thanksgiving, I read an article about a trafficking operation moving across multiple states, using vans and staged breakdowns to target isolated rest stops. Authorities had made arrests near that very highway. The article didn't mention a woman without shoes wandering out of the trees. Even now, when I pull into rest areas, I find myself checking the edge of the forest, half expecting her to step out again, whispering for someone to notice her without being noticed. My therapist had spent months nudging me to reconnect with my brother and sister, but drafting those Thanksgiving invitation emails felt like dragging razor wire down my throat. 5 years had passed without a single word exchanged, all because a ridiculous argument about our father's estate mutated into something far worse than any of us intended. Before attorneys and valuations and buried bitterness twisted everything, Dana and Malcolm had been my closest allies. Sitting in my kitchen that October afternoon, I stared at my laptop for 20 straight minutes before forcing myself to hit send. When Dana responded 2 days later with a short "will be there," and Malcolm followed it with a simple "count me in," I had to barricade myself in the bathroom at work to get a grip. 39 years on Earth, and there I was crying in a stall over 2 tiny replies. By the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, my dining room looked like a culinary catalog had exploded inside it. I'd spent nearly $300 at Fairway, another $100 at Trader Joe's, and even drove 40 minutes out to some boutique market in Marston Hill for imported Danish butter that supposedly elevated everything. Every single item remained sealed inside its original wrapping, lined up on my counter like forensic evidence. The 21-pound turkey from that meticulously ethical farm up north. The pre-prepared sides with their untouched tamper-proof labels. Even the pies came locked in those infuriating plastic shells you practically need power tools to crack open. Dana was bringing her husband Rowan and their daughter Lily, who I hadn't seen since she was missing her front teeth at age 9. Malcolm would arrive by himself, his divorce finalized just 8 weeks earlier, probably bracing for the questions everyone would politely avoid. Thanksgiving morning arrived beneath one of those cold, flawless skies that made you want to breathe deeper. I got up at 6, too wired to stay in bed. The turkey went in the oven first, staying wrapped until the last possible moment before I dropped it into the roasting pan. I even snapped a picture of the sealed packaging right before opening it, some paranoid instinct wanting visual proof that everything started off normal. The kitchen filled with that comforting aroma of herbs and roasting meat, and for a little while, I let myself believe this reunion might actually work. I kept checking my phone expecting last-minute excuses, but the family group chat stayed mostly silent except for Dana sending a thumbs-up emoji when I reminded them dinner was at 4. They arrived within moments of each other, which felt rehearsed, like they'd coordinated outside to minimize any awkward early interactions. Lily had grown into a breathtaking young woman with Dana's features and Malcolm's steady calm, and she hugged me warmly enough to almost make me fall apart again. Malcolm looked depleted, carved out in that unmistakable way heartbreak shapes a person, but he brought a bouquet of soft yellow roses, Mom's favorite. We tiptoed around the obvious tension with almost professional finesse, filling the room with talk about traffic, weather, and Lily's college applications while I ferried dishes between the kitchen and table. Rowan carved the turkey, cracking a joke about his precision from years of fly fishing, and for a precious half hour, we felt like a family again. We were halfway through dinner when Dana's fork slipped from her hand and clanged against her plate. Her face drained of color so fast it reminded me of a TV with the contrast suddenly dialed down. Rowan was asking if she felt all right when she collapsed forward, nearly face-planting into the mashed potatoes before he caught her. Lily screamed, that piercing note only teenagers seem to hit, and I reached for my phone just as Malcolm made a strangled sound. He lurched to his feet, knocking over his chair, grabbing at his throat as though choking on nothing. His eyes found mine for one horrifying second, full of confusion and fear before he crumpled and dragged half the tablecloth with him to the floor. Everything after that unfolded in disjointed flashes like a film missing frames. Rowan performing chest compressions on Dana while Lily counted shakily through her tears. Me trying to explain to the 911 operator that 2 people had collapsed mid-meal. No, they didn't have known allergies. Yes, they were barely breathing. The turkey sitting there on its platter looking grotesque and out of place, while Malcolm writhed on my dining room floor. I remember noticing absurd details, the perfect arc of spilled wine staining my grandmother's tablecloth, the single candle flickering more than it should despite no one being near it. Paramedics arrived in 12 minutes that stretched like hours. Suddenly the house swarmed with strangers in uniforms, radios crackling, their medical jargon bouncing off the walls. At the hospital, they separated all of us immediately. Dana and Malcolm went straight to the ICU while the rest of us shuffled into exam rooms for blood draws and questioning. A doctor with tired eyes explained that both my siblings showed signs of poisoning tetrodotoxin, the kind found in pufferfish, which made no sense since we hadn't eaten seafood. Police arrived while nurses drew my blood yet again, 2 detectives who looked thoroughly done with working a holiday shift. They confiscated my phone after I showed them the picture of the sealed turkey and had me write down every single thing we'd eaten, where each item came from, and who had access to my house. Rowan kept Lily tucked against him while she trembled, both of them testing negative for toxins just like me. Detective Alvarez, a woman with streaks of silver in her dark hair, drove me back home near midnight to gather food evidence. My dining room looked like a scene from the true crime shows Lily always watched. Half-eaten plates, Malcolm's overturned chair, the wine stains spreading deeper into the fabric. We combed through the kitchen wearing gloves, bagging leftovers, packaging from the trash, even rinsed containers I'd already washed. Alvarez found the turkey wrapper in the recycling, held it up to the glow of her phone, and that was when we both saw it, a pin-sized puncture near the bottom corner, barely visible. She sealed it into an evidence bag, face unreadable, but I caught the way she exhaled sharply. Someone had injected poison straight through that packaging, meaning they'd been in the store, choosing that bird specifically, knowing I would pick it. They kept me in the precinct until nearly 4 in the morning, interrogating me until my voice went raw. Who knew about the dinner? Who knew where I shopped? Had anyone been following me? Did my siblings have enemies? Did I? Under those fluorescent lights, everything felt surreal, like I was watching myself from a distance, a woman in a stained blouse insisting she had no idea who'd want to harm her family. Alvarez had the store pull 3 days of security footage, looking for anyone lingering near the turkey section. They asked about my ex-husband, but Leo lived in Arizona now with his new family and hadn't contacted me in ages. They asked about work, but I handled medical billing, nothing dramatic enough to inspire murder. I stayed at a motel that night, unable to face that devastated dining room. I didn't sleep. I sat in the stiff chair by the window, watching occasional headlights sweep across the empty street, refreshing my phone every few minutes for updates. Dana was stable but unconscious and on a ventilator. Malcolm surfaced briefly, unable to speak, but squeezed a nurse's hand to show he could hear. The room stank of old smoke beneath layers of cheap air freshener, and I kept replaying the dinner in my mind, searching for warning signs. Had anyone been watching the house when they arrived? How had the symptoms hit so quickly? And why only my siblings when we all ate the same food? Around 6, I drove to the hospital where Rowan was stretched across 3 waiting room chairs with Lily curled against him like she was small again. Alvarez called while I stood by a vending machine wrestling with some horrible coffee. Her voice held something tense, something sharp. She needed me back home immediately. Wouldn't say why. The 15-minute drive felt endless, my thoughts spiraling through every grim scenario. When I pulled up, 2 additional patrol cars sat in my driveway, and an officer was stringing yellow tape across the porch. Alvarez met me on the sidewalk holding an evidence bag with a white sheet of paper inside. Her first words made my knees wobble. Someone had left a note beneath my doormat during the night while I was at the motel. Computer printed one chilling sentence. You should have never brought them together. Agolda. Everything blew up after that. Federal agents called in because tetrodotoxin supposedly triggers certain bioterrorism protocols. They dug through every aspect of our lives, ripping open half a decade of old wounds, trying to find anyone furious enough about our reunion to do this. Footage showed a figure in a cap and medical mask lingering by the turkey section 3 times, always dodging clear camera angles as if they knew where every lens was. Both my siblings survived, though Dana has permanent nerve damage in her left hand, and Malcolm still battles seizures that may never cease. We never found out who did it, not officially. But months later, off the record, Alvarez confided that she suspected someone who benefited from our estrangement, someone who'd conveniently inserted themselves into our lives during those years apart. She didn't name them, claiming there wasn't enough proof, but the way she looked at me made my mind jump straight to Rowan's cousin, Grant. The one who handled Malcolm's divorce, the one who kept insisting family gatherings only made things worse, the one who abruptly left town the day after Thanksgiving for a supposed job in Vancouver no one had heard about before. The strangest twist came 6 months later, when I finally tore up the ruined carpet beneath the dining table. Wedged between 2 floorboards, I found a USB drive that absolutely hadn't been there when we renovated 3 years earlier. My whole body froze when I plugged it in. One video file with a timestamp from Thanksgiving morning. It showed my kitchen from a hidden angle, meaning someone had placed a camera inside my home, and I never found where. The footage showed me prepping the meal, and then someone else entering through the back door wearing dark clothes and a ski mask. They had a key I didn't know existed. They walked straight to my refrigerator, located my turkey instantly, and injected something through the packaging before leaving. The figure's height, posture, movements, everything suggested it was a woman, and on her right hand was a fresh-looking scar. I gave the USB to Alvarez immediately, and hours later they arrested Grant's girlfriend, a woman named Rhea, who'd been fired from a pharmaceutical lab the year before for stealing restricted compounds. Turns out Grant had siphoned nearly $35,000 from Malcolm's settlement. When he heard about our reunion, he panicked, afraid we'd compare financial details and realize what he'd done. Rhea admitted everything for a plea deal, 25 years instead of life. She claimed she only meant to make everyone sick enough to sabotage the dinner and didn't realize the dose would nearly kill them. Grant got 40 years without parole. Prosecutors said he'd planned it since October, right after I'd sent those invitations. He'd planted the hidden camera during a friendly visit, copied my spare key, tracked my shopping through credit card access granted during divorce proceedings. The USB had been Rhea's insurance in case Grant turned on her. Now, every Sunday without fail, Dana, Malcolm, and I meet for dinner, always at restaurants where we can see the kitchen, always ordering separate meals, never sharing. We never talk about that Thanksgiving. But we also don't drift far from each other anymore. And honestly, that's the only comfort we got out of nearly losing everything that grudges are luxuries you can only afford when you're certain you'll have another chance to fix them. My parents lived in one of those neighborhoods where every house looked like it came from the same blueprint. The lawns were trimmed to identical lengths, and the grocery clerk knew your birthday without checking the screen. Mom had been cooking since Tuesday. The kitchen windows were misted over from all the steam, and her apron was coated in flour and unidentifiable splatters she wore like a badge. By the time I pulled into the driveway around 3 in the afternoon, I could already smell the turkey wafting through the vents of my car. That warm, buttery aroma mingled with cinnamon and nutmeg drifting from whatever pies were cooling inside. Jenna's minivan was parked sideways as usual, and Lewis's rental sat next to it with the airport tag still stuck to the dash. Inside, the house buzzed with the chaos that only happens when a family reunites. Voices layered over one another, kids shrieking and running in circles, football commentators murmuring from the living room, and Mom directing everything from the stove like a conductor. Dinner was supposed to be at 5, though we all knew that meant 5:30 in Mom's standard time. After she checked the turkey 4 more times and rearranged the already perfect table settings, Marcy arrived around 4:30, breezing through the door with excuses about traffic and carrying a store-bought pie that Mom would politely place next to her homemade ones. We were gathered in the living room catching up, Lewis recounting his bumpy flight while Mark tried to keep the twins from smashing Mom's beloved ceramic pilgrim figurines she'd had since the early 80s. Dad was dozing off in his chair, mouth slightly open, remote balanced on his stomach rising and falling with each breath. Everything felt normal, comfortable in that predictable holiday way. November always pulls me back to that one Thanksgiving when I drove to my parents' place in Rhode Island. The radio was humming old classics while leaves spun across the freeway. I had just earned a promotion at the editing firm I worked for, and for once, I felt like I had something worth celebrating with the family. Mom had called 3 separate times that week to make sure I wasn't skipping the holiday, reminding me to bring my cornbread stuffing, the same one everyone claimed to adore, even though I suspected it was mostly politeness. Dad was likely in his usual recliner, watching football at an unnecessary volume and sneaking bites of whatever Mom had cooling on the counter. My sister Jenna would be there with her husband Mark and their 2 boys. My brother Lewis was flying in from Denver with his girlfriend. Even cousin Marcy promised she'd show up, though punctuality had never been her strength since college. Around 4:45, just as Mom was calling for help carrying dishes to the dining room, the doorbell rang. We all paused because everyone had arrived, and Mom hadn't said anything about extra guests. Marcy suddenly sprung up, mumbling something about how she forgot to mention she'd invited someone. Her voice carried that uneven tone she got whenever she was hiding something. She darted to the door before we could ask anything, and we heard her greet someone warmly, though her laugh had this stiff, brittle quality to it. She returned with a man mid-30s wearing a charcoal sweater over a crisp white shirt, dark jeans, everything ironed and tidy like he'd stepped out of a catalog display. His face was handsome in that forgettable blend-into-a-crowd way. Short brown hair, clean-shaven, the type you'd pass downtown and never think about again. We settled around the dining table, Mom's best china glittering beneath the chandelier she only lit for special occasions. The turkey was perfectly bronzed, surrounded by an army of side dishes. Dad carved while we passed mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, canned cranberry slices, just the way Dad preferred, and my stuffing, which everyone took tiny portions of to spare my feelings. Aaron sat between Marcy and Louis, slicing his food into exact uniform bites before eating each piece slowly. He answered questions when prompted, but never began conversations on his own. I noticed he kept glancing at the windows, quick little checks like he was waiting for something. Marcy introduced him as Aaron, and Mom immediately slipped into hostess mode. She welcomed him in, insisting he stay for dinner since there was more than enough food. He shook hands all around, grip firm without posturing. He smiled at the kids without that fake tone some adults force, and commented on the house in this quiet, steady manner. His voice had a peculiar quality, not monotone, but flat enough that it felt rehearsed. Louis offered him a beer, which he declined in favor of water. Jenna was already setting an additional place, and Mark was making polite conversation about the weather, asking how he and Marcy knew each other. Aaron's answers were normal but strangely non-specific, saying they met through mutual acquaintances and keeping everything shallow without sounding evasive. The twins were growing antsy, kicking the table legs and demanding pie, while Jenna tried to bribe them with promises of extra topping if they ate a few more vegetables. That's when I noticed it, a dark spot on Aaron's sleeve when he reached for the salt. It spread beneath his cuff, maybe 3 inches up his forearm. At first I thought it was gravy or wine, but the color was wrong, too dark, nearly black against the gray fabric, and the material looked stiff like something had dried into it. Without thinking, I asked him about the stain. The table fell silent in that sharp way that rings in your ears. Aaron looked down at his sleeve slowly, like he had forgotten it was there, and slid his arm under the table. Marcy tried to mumble something about him being clumsy, always spilling things, but her voice collapsed halfway through the lie. Mom stared at the spot where his arm had been, fork frozen midair, gravy dripping onto the tablecloth she had ironed that morning. Then Aaron stood, not fast, but with a horrible sense of intention, pushing his chair back evenly. I remember noticing how clean his fingernails were, too clean, like he had scrubbed them harshly. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out something black and heavy-looking. For a moment my brain refused to register it, because something like that didn't belong next to Mom's ceramic turkey salt shakers. Dad began to rise, napkin falling to the floor, telling him to relax, that we could talk. But Aaron raised the gun toward him without even glancing, like it was habitual, and Dad dropped back into his seat hard enough to rattle the dishes. One of the twins began crying in that broken, confused way kids cry when something is terribly wrong. Mark pulled them close, but Aaron clicked his tongue once, and Mark froze. Aaron walked to the dining room doorway, gun dangling loosely like it weighed nothing, and locked the deadbolt. The sound was too loud in the silent room, punctuated only by the child's whimpering and the tick of the grandfather clock. He said he hadn't expected the whole family would be present, that things were meant to be simpler, but plans evolve. His thumb drew tiny circles on Marcy's shoulder, a bizarre mimicry of comfort. Louis cautiously asked what he wanted. Money? A car? Anything we could negotiate. Aaron tilted his head like Louis had spoken nonsense. He explained he'd been tracking Marcy for weeks, learning her routines, watching her movements, waiting for the right time. Thanksgiving had seemed ideal, because she'd be relaxed, joyful, distracted, except she'd invited him inside herself, believing he was someone from her Pilates class who had been flirting with her. He moved to the windows, closing each curtain one by one, slow and deliberate, and with every sweep of the fabric, the room shrank and darkened even though the chandelier burned overhead. When he turned back, something in his expression had shifted, not physically, but in the way he carried his face, like he had stopped pretending to be someone ordinary and let the truth slip through. He told us to place our phones on the table, voice still calm and steady. We obeyed automatically. Mom's floral case, Dad's old flip phone, everyone's devices forming a pile beside the steaming gravy boat. Marcy trembled so violently her chair creaked, tears landing on her plate and mixing with cranberry sauce into something that looked diluted and red. Aaron moved behind her, resting his free hand on her shoulder, and she went completely still like prey hiding from a predator's shadow. The next 2 hours felt endless. Aaron kept us immobile while he ate pie, the gun resting beside his plate like it was merely another utensil, occasionally lifting it to gesture if someone moved or breathed too loudly. He told us about trailing Marcy home from the supermarket, waiting outside her building, how simple it had been to copy her parking permit, to enter her apartment complex's gym when she exercised every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Mom tried to calm the twins by humming old lullabies. Dad's jaw flexed like he was suppressing words he dared not speak. At one point, the youngest twin vomited, fear and turkey mixing into something foul, and Aaron forced Jenna to clean it with Mom's good napkins while the rest of us sat motionless. He combed through our phones reading messages aloud, scrolling through photos, asking us about people in them like he was making small talk. Each time he brushed Marcy's hair, she made these soft, wounded sounds. Around 8:30, Lewis's girlfriend nudged her foot slowly toward her purse, where she kept a pepper spray canister she'd proudly shown me earlier. Aaron noticed instantly. He shot the purse, just the purse, but the sound cracked through the room so violently that my hearing rang long afterward. The twins screamed. Mom held them close despite his warning not to move, and the bullet went straight through the purse into the hardwood floor, leaving a hole that would later be covered with a rug no one discussed again. He said the next shot wouldn't be aimed downward. Lewis's girlfriend wet herself, shame and terror washing across her face, an image that still returns to me on sleepless nights. We sat another hour in paralyzed silence until distant sirens drew near. Aaron stood as though he'd been expecting them, walked to the back door leading to Mom's garden, and instructed us to count to 100 out loud before moving. We complied, voices unsteady, while his steps faded across the deck. Then everything went quiet. The police found us still seated when they forced the front door open. Marcy was in shock, unable to speak for 3 days. MTs checked each of us, though the only physical marks were the bruises on Marcy's shoulder. Aaron wasn't his real name, and the man they eventually captured 3 states away had been doing this for years, choosing solitary women, sometimes just observing, sometimes breaking in. Our family was his first attempt with multiple people present. Detectives said we were fortunate that things could have ended far worse, but fortunate is not the word any of us would choose. Marcy moved back in with my parents for 6 months. She couldn't be alone. She startled at every knock, avoided yoga entirely, and stayed away from places where friendly strangers might ask too many questions. We still do Thanksgiving at Mom and Dad's because Mom refused to let him take that from us, but it's different now. Quieter, smaller, everyone arrives together, everyone leaves together. No unfamiliar guests, no last-minute invites unless we've known the person for years. Dad installed 3 new deadbolts in a security system he checks constantly. The hole in the dining room floor is hidden beneath a Persian rug Mom bought at an estate sale, and everyone steps around it as though it's something volatile, as though disturbing it might summon him back. Sometimes during dinner, one of us will glance at the corner where his chair sits now, used only for jackets, and will make eye contact before quickly looking away, the memory passing between us like a jolt of static. The twins barely remember that night, which is merciful. But Jenna says they occasionally ask why everyone got so silent, why Aunt Marcy cried, why we counted to 100. She tells them it was just a silly grown-up game that went on too long, and they accept that, because they were young enough for their minds to shield them, rewriting the truth into something gentler, something that couldn't haunt their dreams. Thanksgiving week always worked under my skin. The interstate seemed endless, quiet except for the steady purr of my aging Crimson Vista and the rare sweep of headlights carving through the night. I'd left the office later than planned, hoping to dodge the holiday gridlock by heading straight to my folks' place in northern Missouri. A thermos of burnt coffee sat by my elbow, talk radio whispered in the background, and a torn-open bag of pretzels sagged on the passenger seat. Normally, drives like that helped me unwind, but that night the highway felt dense, like the pavement swallowed every bit of sound instead of sending it back. By the time midnight rolled in, the world outside my windshield had become a corridor of black timber and faint yellow paint. That's when I caught the faint pulse of hazard lights up ahead, steady, red, and strangely entrancing. A charcoal sedan leaned awkwardly across the shoulder as if one wheel had given out or the driver had misjudged the lane. I assumed they'd struck something or simply run their tank dry. I slowed without thinking, rolled the window down just enough to hear, and saw a lone figure beside the car gesturing stiffly in the stuttering glow. Nothing about it seemed staged at first, just someone freezing on a lonely road. I parked several yards behind, kept my engine humming, and reached for my flashlight in the glove box. The air outside was so cold it stung the inside of my nose. The man by the car, maybe mid-30s, called something out, but the wind swallowed his words. His voice carried a raw edge like speaking hurt. As I moved closer, my flashlight drifted along the bumper, and that's when I noticed another shape huddled low behind the sedan. At first, I assumed they were inspecting the tire, but the posture didn't add up. They weren't fixing anything, they were waiting. A bolt of instinct flared inside me before I could explain it away. I slowed down, angled the flashlight so I wouldn't give away how alert I suddenly felt. The man standing forced a small, awkward smile and said his battery died, though his tone sounded unnaturally rehearsed. The crouched figure didn't budge, only shifted enough for me to catch a muted glint near their hand. Metal? Maybe? Or maybe nothing at all. But the sight twisted something inside me. Every part of me urged a slow retreat, though turning my back too soon felt like a mistake. I offered a friendly laugh and mentioned I had jumper cables in my trunk, trying to sound casual as I worked out my next move. The man nodded too quickly and flicked a glance toward the crouched silhouette like he was waiting for direction. My headlights threw long shadows across the asphalt, and that's when I realized how isolated the stretch truly was. No ranch houses in the distance, no gas station glow, nothing but dark woods pressed up on either side. I lifted my trunk only halfway and pretended to rummage while keeping one eye on them. That was when the crouched figure rose. They were taller than I expected, hood pulled tight, and for a brief second they froze under the beam, weighing their options. That brief stillness snapped whatever hesitation lingered in me. I slammed the trunk shut, dove into the driver's seat, and hit the locks in one motion. The first man barked something harsh and unrecognizable as both of them rushed toward my car. My tires skidded on the gravel before gripping the pavement, and soon the hazard lights faded in the mirror. But then I saw movement in the red glow of my taillights. The sedan's headlights suddenly burst alive. They hadn't been stranded at all. My pulse pounded in sync with the road as I floored the accelerator. The sedan's lights ballooned behind me, closing in. Every bend in the highway felt like a dice roll. One misjudgment and I'd slide off into the trees. I had no signal, no way to call anyone. My only plan was to keep going until civilization appeared. Then I saw a green reflective marker flash past. Exit 32, 5 miles. I had no clue what town it led to, but options were running thin. They edged closer, high beams blasting my mirrors as they swerved across lanes, trying to pull up beside me. I clamped the wheels straight, hoping the road stayed mercifully smooth. At last I spotted a faint cluster of yellow lights up ahead, a rundown gas station and a diner. I veered across the lane, fighting to stay steady, and rocketed down the exit ramp at nearly 70. The car fishtailed but didn't flip. Behind me, the sedan overshot the exit entirely, sailing down the highway until it disappeared into the void. I drifted into the gas station lot and parked under the brightest light I could find. For a minute I stayed there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. The place looked half abandoned, the kind of station that claimed 24-hour service but barely meant it. A flickering sign buzzed overhead, and a faded blue pickup sat empty by the store entrance. I stepped out and scanned the highway. Nothing but a far-off hum in the distance. My pulse thrashed, but the silence pressed even harder than the chase had. Inside, I tried explaining everything to the cashier, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19. He blinked slowly, like he wasn't sure if I was pulling a prank, until I pointed toward the dark stretch of road. He lifted the phone immediately and called the county sheriff. While waiting, I caught my reflection in the cooler glass. I looked washed out, older, like the night had scraped something off of me. When the deputy arrived, I gave him every detail, the staged breakdown, the crouched figure, the sudden headlights. He listened carefully, jotting notes, then told me something that made my stomach knot all over again. There had been 3 similar cases that week. People stopping to help stranded motorists along that same highway, only to be chased or robbed, and 1 car had already gone missing. The deputy offered to escort me to the next town so I could rest at a motel, and I agreed instantly. The drive felt longer than it should have. Every pair of headlights in my mirror sent a jolt through me. Even in the motel room, sleep refused to come. I kept the blinds cracked, the TV murmuring, and the keys within reach. When I finally drifted off near sunrise, I dreamed of blinking hazard lights pulsing in the dark, always inching closer, never fading. It's been years, but I avoid late-night drives whenever possible. Each Thanksgiving, my family teases me about slowing down in my old age, but they don't know the reason. Sometimes when I'm on an empty highway and a pair of lights flicker in the distance, my foot hesitates before hitting the gas. I think of the man waving me down and the shadow behind the car waiting for me to stop. Maybe they hit another highway. Maybe the sheriff's department caught them. Or maybe they're still out there waiting for someone else who's willing to be kind. I've spent most of my life fixing engines in a quiet little town about an hour from Fairhaven, and that Thanksgiving was supposed to be one of the rare peaceful days I'd get all season. My sister Marin had driven in with her husband and their 2 sons, and my mom insisted we host dinner at my place since I'd just finished giving the kitchen a full upgrade. The whole afternoon sat under a dull, wintry blanket of clouds, the kind of sky that refuses to brighten and just hangs pale and heavy above the rooftops. I remember feeling grateful to have everyone gathered in the same space again, the TV humming with football commentary, the scent of herbs and bread filling the air, and Marin nagging me because she thought I'd cut the loaf unevenly. Around 5, I started slicing into the turkey. It had been cooking since midday, coming out golden and flawless. The overhead light flickered once, a quick flash that made my mom joke about the bad spirits hiding in my new wiring. I laughed it off and kept carving. But then the lights dimmed again, this time deeper, shifting the entire room into an odd bluish tint before returning to normal. My nephew Jonah laughed and said the house looked like a scene from a scary movie. I didn't think much of it, though I remember glancing at the window and noticing how unnervingly still the world outside had become, as if the wind had suddenly stopped moving altogether. A few moments later, the smell in the room shifted. At first it was faint, just a trace of something chemical pushing through the cozy notes of butter and roasted meat. Then the smoke alarm gave a single chirp and fell silent, even though I could see a subtle haze beginning to rise. I turned toward the oven, only to spot smoke curling out from the seams of the door, dense gray, moving with purpose. Marin yelled, "Something's burning." I assumed some fat had splattered over the pan, nothing major, so I grabbed the oven mitts and pulled open the door. The blast that erupted wasn't a normal flare-up. Flames shot outward like they'd been waiting for oxygen, bursting with a force that roared loud enough to vibrate through the room. I staggered back, the mitts already smoldering at the edges. My mom shouted for everyone to get outside, and Jonah started crying. I rushed to the front door, pulling on the knob, but it didn't move, not even a click. I pulled again, harder. It wouldn't budge, as if someone had welded it shut. Behind me, fire crawled up the wall, and it hit me that this wasn't just kitchen grease catching flame. Something else had been ready to ignite. I filled a pot with water and hurled it at the base of the flames. It hissed weakly, barely denting the blaze. The fire climbed higher, feeding on some invisible accelerant. The air carried a sharp synthetic sting that burned my eyes. Marin was swinging a chair at the window, but the glass only splintered, instead of breaking through. My mom was on the phone with emergency services, reading off our address, but her voice felt tiny under the roar of burning wood. The ceiling began to darken, flakes of soot drifting down like black snow. I kept repeating in my head, "This can't be happening, not here." Then I noticed a different smell leaking from behind the stove. Sweet, almost syrupy, like gasoline blended with melting plastic. Peering through the waves of heat, I saw a smeared, glistening trail along the baseboard. Someone had poured accelerant there, letting it soak deep into the wood. My first reaction was disbelief. No one but me had been home all morning. I remembered locking the door after taking out the trash. The idea that someone had entered my house while I worked in the garage twisted something deep inside me. Marin finally shattered a side window with the fire poker, cutting her hand in the process. We shoved the kids through first, then my mom. The cold air outside hit them like ice, already clouded with thick smoke gushing out behind us. I remained in the kitchen long enough to reach for the fire extinguisher beneath the counter, but when I pulled the pin and pressed the handle, it coughed out half a stream of foam and then died completely. The needle pointed deep in the red. It felt like everything that could fail that night had chosen to do exactly that. I dropped it and realized I had seconds before the cabinets would erupt too. I squeezed through the broken window, landing hard on the frozen ground outside. Behind me, the curtains ignited and the living room filled with orange light. Neighbors rushed over carrying blankets and buckets. but the fire had already chewed up the roofline. I stood there in bare feet on the frosty pavement, watching the work of years collapse into one towering plume of smoke. Sirens wailed somewhere far away, but time felt warped, stretching each noise into something distant and distorted. By the time the fire crews arrived, half the house had already caved in. They kept yelling for me to step back, but I couldn't move. I stared at the spot behind the stove, knowing exactly what had been hidden there. Later, an officer told me the accelerant had soaked deep enough to act like a concealed fuse. Whoever had done it must have poured it hours before, waiting for the heat to activate it. The oven must have triggered the whole thing. I couldn't process it. Who would plan something like that? And why target me? The next morning, after the fire crews left, I walked through what remained. The air carried the sour scent of drenched ashes and burned metal. The kitchen walls were gone, leaving bare beams exposed all the way into the dining area. But the strangest discovery wasn't the destruction, it was what they pulled from behind the stove. A metal canister, empty, scorched black, wedged between the pipes as if placed with intention. The fire chief said it couldn't have accidentally ended up there. It had been hidden deliberately. The police asked who had keys to my place, and I listed the few names: Marin, my mom, and my ex, Elise. I hadn't spoken to Elise in months, not since our messy breakup over money she owed and never returned. When they contacted her, she swore she hadn't gone anywhere near my house. I wanted to believe her, but something about the placement of the canister told me the person responsible knew the layout well enough to plan it carefully. That thought clung to me long after the case went cold. 2 years have passed since then. The official report says the fire was caused by deliberate arson carried out by an unidentified individual. Insurance helped me rebuild part of the structure, but I sold the place as soon as I could. I couldn't stay there knowing someone had walked through my home, poured fuel behind my stove, and left my family and me to burn. Every Thanksgiving after that I cook somewhere else, usually at a friend's house. I don't even keep a real oven anymore, just a microwave and a habit of checking every lock twice before going to bed. Thanksgiving morning always played out the same way in our home. Careful chaos blended with the scent of butter heating in the oven while I checked the dining table over and over to make sure we had enough seats. That year, 2016, my in-laws were flying in from Nevada, and my husband Mark left before dawn to go collect them from Logan Airport. Their flight was scheduled to land at 7 a.m., so he figured he'd make it back by 9:30, maybe 10 if traffic turned rough. I remember standing in the doorway in my pajamas watching the glow of his taillights retreat down our quiet street in Fairford, New Jersey. He kissed me on the forehead, told me to start the turkey without him, and said he'd call once he got his parents. That moment, simple and calm, was the last time my world felt normal. I went back inside, started the coffee, and began peeling sweet potatoes with no clue my life was about to fracture in a way I'd never repair. By 11 a.m., irritation started creeping in. Mark still hadn't called, and neither had his parents. I tried his cell 3 times, but it went straight to voicemail, which wasn't unheard of since he occasionally forgot to plug it in at night. But his mother, Elaine, she never let her battery dip below 70%. When her call also went to voicemail, I assumed maybe the flight had been delayed or everyone was stuck in an airport dead zone. I texted Mark a few times asking for updates, reminding him the turkey was in the oven, and asking whether his dad still preferred the citrus cranberry sauce or the plain one. Those tiny domestic questions felt urgent back then. Around noon, my sister Kara arrived to help with meal prep, and she immediately sensed something was off. I kept checking my phone like it might magically light up with a message. I walked to the living room window over and over, convinced a car would suddenly pull into the driveway. Kara tried grounding me, suggesting they'd stop for breakfast or hit a brutal backup on the interstate. But I knew Mark, he always found a way to call. By 1 I phoned the airline directly. The woman confirmed that Elaine and Robert Linden were on the flight, that it had landed on time at 7:04 a.m., and that they had already picked up their luggage. My pulse thudded so hard I could barely process the words. If they had landed, and if they had collected their bags, then why hadn't they met Mark? And where was he? When Elaine's phone went to voicemail for the 6th time, panic finally dug its claws in. Kara grabbed the phone from my shaking hand and took over. She's always been the level-headed one. She suggested we call local hospitals in case there'd been an accident and nobody had reached me yet. For the next hour, we called every ER between Fairford and Boston, giving Mark's description: dark blue Honda Civic, small dent in the rear bumper from a mailbox mishap months earlier. No one matching him, no accidents involving his car. When Kara gently told me we needed to call the police, I resisted. It felt dramatic, like I'd be embarrassing myself when Mark walked in with some wild explanation. But by then it was almost 3 p.m., and he'd been gone for 8 hours without a single word. The officer who picked up was courteous but not overly alarmed. He explained that grown adults disappear for short periods all the time and most return within a day. He took Mark's information, the car details, and asked whether we'd argued or if Mark had any reason to want space. I almost snorted at the idea. Mark wasn't unpredictable. We'd been married 6 years together, 9, and he was a software developer who color-coded his calendar down to the hour. Spontaneity wasn't in his DNA. Still, the officer said he'd put out a bulletin and told me to call back if I didn't hear anything by morning. Morning felt impossibly far away. By forehand, I still hadn't reached Elaine or Robert, and dread settled in like a weight. Kara suggested we drive to Logan Airport ourselves, hoping maybe they were still there, confused or waiting for Mark. It was a desperate thought, but I was desperate. During the drive, I kept trying to rationalize everything. Maybe Mark borrowed someone's phone but didn't know my number by memory. Maybe he'd gone to the wrong terminal. Maybe the airline had mixed up their landing information. When we arrived, we went straight to baggage claim, asking every staff member around. No one had seen Mark or his parents. We checked the parking garage and walked aisle after aisle, but Mark's car wasn't there. Driving home in silence, the sunset cast a deep amber glow across the sky. Normally my favorite part of the day, but that evening it felt eerie and out of place. When we turned into my driveway and saw the half-prepared Thanksgiving dishes still sitting out under bright kitchen lights, something inside me cracked. Kara held me as I fell apart in the passenger seat, trembling with a fear that felt like it had no bottom. The police came around 8 p.m., 2 detectives, 1 man and 1 woman, both wearing civilian clothes and carrying the kind of seriousness that drains the air from a room. They introduced themselves as Detective Rowan and Detective Ortiz. They asked me to recount everything: what time Mark left, what he wore, a gray Pinebrook University hoodie and jeans, what route he normally took, whether he seemed distracted that morning. He'd been his usual self, even excited about how his dad would want to watch football later. They asked about work stress, our marriage, finances, enemies. Their questions stung with implication, like they were searching for a reason he'd chosen to vanish. I repeated over and over, Mark wouldn't disappear. Detective Ortiz asked for a recent photo, so I showed her one from a wedding 2 weeks earlier, Mark in a navy suit, smiling with his arm around me. She sent it to herself, and that was when the gravity hit me fully. The police were now officially searching for him. I woke up on the couch the next morning, still in yesterday's clothes, stunned when I realized Kara was asleep across from me. Reality surged back in a rush. My phone showed 11 missed calls, 3 from Rowan, 2 unknown numbers, and 6 from Mark's office. When I called Rowan back, his tone told me everything was about to get worse. They'd found Mark's car at a gas station off Highway 9 in Ridgehaven, barely 20 minutes from our house and nowhere near Logan Airport. The car was locked, keys still in the ignition, wallet intact with cash and cards untouched. His phone was inside, completely dead. The station owner said the car had been there since noon on Thanksgiving, and when it was still there the next day, he reported it. 3 hours later, Rowan called again and told me they needed me at the station to review the surveillance footage. My stomach churned the whole ride there. Inside a small room, Rowan warned me the footage might be upsetting but that I needed to focus. The black and white video showed Mark's car pulling up to Pump 4 at 6:42 a.m. He got out, swiped his card, and started fueling up. He checked his phone, probably looking at the flight details. Then a man approached him, dark jacket, baseball cap low over his face, gesturing toward a car behind Mark's. Mark slipped his phone into his pocket and walked with the man out of the frame. That was the last moment he appeared. 30 seconds later, the pump clicked off, the nozzle dangling as fuel dripped to the ground. His car sat there untouched the rest of the recording. I watched the clip over and over, trying to catch something, anything. The stranger's face was hidden, and his car's license plate wasn't visible. just a pale-colored sedan. Ortiz asked whether the man seemed familiar, whether Mark had mentioned meeting anyone or acting uneasy lately. But everything had been normal. Work frustrations, vacation plans, nothing sinister. Rowan said they were treating this as a likely abduction, sending alerts across nearby states, reviewing traffic cameras to trace the sedan. His words sounded like they were underwater. All I could picture was Mark following that man out of frame without knowing he'd never return. Calling Elaine and Robert was torture. They had been stranded at Logan for hours, confused and increasingly frightened. Airport security eventually helped them file a report, and they got a hotel room nearby. When I told Elaine that Mark was missing and likely hadn't reached the airport at all, the sound she made over the phone will stay with me for the rest of my life, a raw, anguished wail only a mother blindsided by horror could make. They flew back to Nevada the next morning. Robert kept saying they should have taken a taxi, blaming himself even though none of this was their doing. Everyone was overwhelmed with questions that had no answers. Why did Mark stop on Highway 9? Why that gas station? Did the man follow him? Was it random? Did Mark know him? The detectives said most abductions involve someone the victim knows, but I couldn't think of a single person who'd want to harm him. Mark was gentle, introverted, responsible. No drama, no debts, no secret life. Weeks passed and the trail went cold. They traced the sedan onto a major highway before losing it in traffic. They combed through Mark's emails, phone records, bank accounts. Nothing pointed anywhere. No ransom demands, no remains found. Tips rolled in from around the country. Someone thought they saw him in Arizona, another in Georgia, another in Oregon. Every lead evaporated. The story made local news for a while. Man disappears on Thanksgiving morning. Family begs for answers. My face was all over the broadcast, pleading for information, offering a reward we could barely pay. Messages flooded in. Kind ones, cruel ones, wild theories. Some said Mark ran away. Others blamed traffickers. A few insisted I was involved. The cruelty of strangers is something you never get used to. His job kept his position open for 3 months before they had to replace him. I tried returning to my dental office but couldn't make it past the parking lot without spiraling. Kara moved in with me for months because the house felt unbearable. His mug in the cabinet, his shoes by the door, the indentation on the couch cushion where he always sat. Everything was a reminder of what was lost. 9 years have passed now. The case is cold. Rowan retired. The new detective calls once a year on the anniversary out of duty, more than optimism. I've adjusted in the ways life forces you to. Therapy, support groups, returning to work, eventually moving to a different apartment. But that hollow place inside never healed. I still don't know who that man was, what he wanted, or where he took Mark. I don't know if Mark is alive or if he died that morning, and I've spent 9 years waiting for someone who will never come home. The worst part is how ordinary everything was. Mark wasn't doing anything risky. He was just filling up his tank on the way to pick up his parents, and someone stole him in broad daylight at a gas station next to a busy road, and no one saw anything helpful. The man in the cap simply slipped away. But sometimes I stop at that same gas station, always at pump 4, like a ritual I can't explain. I stand there and wonder what Mark felt in those final minutes. Did he sense something was off? Did the stranger say something unsettling? Or was Mark simply being his usual helpful self? That's the part that breaks me. His kindness, the trait I cherished most, might be what led him straight into danger. I want people reading this to understand something. This can happen to anyone you love. One moment they're living an ordinary day, and in the next they're gone without a trace. And you're left clinging to unanswered questions and a grainy video that captures the instant your life split open. I still glance at my phone sometimes, half expecting his name to pop up with a harmless apology. Logic doesn't govern hope. It just hangs on, stubborn and aching. If anyone remembers anything about a pale sedan or a man in a dark jacket near Ridgehaven on Thanksgiving 2016, please speak up. After all this time, all I want is to know the truth. I just want my husband home. I hadn't gone back for Thanksgiving in 6 years, not since my father died in that sudden collision on Highway 47, the one that made every regional station run brief segments about the freak accident. Lately, my mom had been calling more and more, her voice sounding thinner each time, and my sister Riley kept texting little reminders about how Mom was cooking dinner for just herself. By October, I finally gave in. I booked a flight from Denver to Providence and tried not to dwell on the real reasons I'd avoided home for so long. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. The pale colonial with blue shutters on Ashmont Street, except Mom's once perfect garden had turned wild. Vines crawled up the mailbox like they were trying to escape the property. Inside, the evening started off normally enough. Riley arrived with her husband Paul and their twin boys, who rushed upstairs to what used to be my bedroom. Mom had prepared her usual lineup overdone turkey, stuffing overloaded with herbs and that canned cranberry sauce Dad always insisted on. We all tiptoed through small talk, that uneasy dance families do when they've spent too many holidays apart. Then Mom suddenly went quiet in the middle of describing her book club, staring at Riley with this uneasy mix of alarm and warning. "Did you remember those old photo albums from the room downstairs?" she asked. "I thought the boys might like to see them." It felt like the entire dining room temperature dipped. Riley's fork clinked loudly against her plate. Paul stopped chewing. Even the twins upstairs went silent, as if the house itself was listening. "What room downstairs?" I asked, trying to sound casual even though my voice came out sharper than I intended. Mom's face drained of color. Riley shot her a look that screamed, "Don't say another word." "Oh, just the basement," Mom said, grabbing her wine glass with a shaking hand. "You know I mix things up sometimes." Except she didn't. She'd never called the basement anything except the basement. She was the sort of woman who did crosswords in pen, never missed appointments, never mixed up anything. But everyone quickly moved on. Paul loudly brought up a football game. Riley launched into a story about the twins' school performance. And just like that, the moment disappeared. Except I couldn't let it go. After dinner, while Riley and Paul wrangled the boys and Mom wrapped leftovers with mechanical precision, I slipped into the hallway. The basement door was exactly where it had always been, the hollow wooden one with the glass knob that never latched right. The hinges squealed when I opened it, and a strange odor drifted out. Not the usual concrete and cardboard smell, but something sharper, like industrial cleaner fighting to cover something damp and unpleasant. The wooden steps felt steeper than I remembered, illuminated by a tired bulb that cast weak yellow light. When I reached the concrete floor, everything looked exactly the same, the old furnace humming, the wooden shelves Dad built sagging under boxes labeled in Mom's neat handwriting, the dusty ping-pong table folded against the far wall. Everything was familiar, except one thing. Near the back wall, past the dead freezer and water heater, there was a door, a heavy wooden door with a deadbolt. Someone had painted it the same dull gray as the walls, like they were trying to make it disappear. That door had never been there. Hanging by the fuse box was a single key on a rubber keychain, shaped like a crab, something you'd buy at a tourist shop on the coast. I grabbed it and walked to the door. The bolt clicked open, sounding unnaturally loud. A wave of foul air hit me. Chemical cleaner mixed with something earthy and rotten, like soaked carpet that never dried. Inside, I found the light switch. A weak bulb flickered on. The room was smaller than I expected, bare concrete, 10 feet by 12 at most. This wasn't storage. In one corner stood a metal bed frame bolted to the floor without a mattress. Heavy chains were fastened near its base, each ending in metal cuffs lined with cracked rubber. On the opposite wall, several metal brackets stuck out with no shelves on them, arranged at staggered heights, almost like measurement lines. A cheap folding chair held a warped spiral notebook. My hands felt like they belonged to someone else as I picked up the notebook. The first pages were harmless, Mom's handwriting listing groceries. But then the entries changed, just dates. Lines of dates written by Dad, beginning in November 2006 and running for years, each accompanied only by a number ranging from 2 to 16, no explanation. Tucked near the back were Polaroids, maybe 20 of them. Every image showed this room, except not empty. People, different people, sat in that chair or stood against the wall, their faces scribbled out with thick black ink. Each held a slip of paper with a date written on it. They were awake, staring at the camera. The notebook fell from my hands, landing with a hollow thud. Something shifted beneath the chair. I pushed it aside and found one of the concrete tiles loose. I pried it up, cracking a fingernail, revealing a shallow compartment filled with driver's licenses, 11 in total, young adults. Mostly men and women in their 20s. One face I recognized immediately, the missing girl whose photo had been everywhere in 2007, Leila Yates, who vanished from a rest stop near Albany. Under the IDs was a folded police report from the Massachusetts State Police, with my father's name at the top, Detective Roland Mercer. The document outlined an internal investigation into missing evidence, witness tampering, and a trafficking ring operating between 2004 and 2009 along the interstate. There was a note handwritten at the bottom, "Roland, we know. Leave quietly or we file charges. Your family doesn't need to know." The report was dated 2 months before Dad retired early. I was still on the floor, surrounded by the IDs, when Mom's footsteps came down the stairs. She froze in the doorway, her expression sliding from shock to resignation. "You weren't supposed to find this," she said softly. Riley appeared behind her, tears already building. They had both known. Mom explained that 6 months after the funeral, they found the key and report in Dad's toolbox. Together they discovered the hidden room. They panicked. If they went to the police, the pension would vanish, the house would be seized, families would suffer again. Dad was already in the ground, so they cleaned what they could and sealed the door. Mom kept slipping though, accidentally mentioning things she vowed to forget. I gathered the notebook, the IDs, the photographs, the police report, all of it, and packed everything into a storage bin. They watched without arguing. "I'm taking this," I told them. "I'll figure out what comes next." The drive back to my hotel was a blur. For 2 weeks, I barely slept. I researched every name on those IDs, found family members, saw decades-old missing posts still circulating online. Some parents had died waiting, others kept searching. Eventually, I contacted a lawyer and learned what could still legally be done so many years later. I scanned every document, every photo, and anonymously mailed the copies to the Cold Case Division along with the address of the house. I kept the originals locked in a safe deposit box in Denver, along with a letter to be opened if anything ever happens to me. 3 weeks later, Mom called sobbing. Police had torn open the basement, forensics everywhere. Riley stopped talking to me altogether. News outlets covered the story for about a month before moving on. Investigators confirmed 6 identities from the room. Some families finally got answers, though accompanied by pain no one deserves. Mom lost the pension. She sold the house and moved into a tiny apartment in Worcester. I help her with rent even though she barely speaks to me now. I haven't set foot in Massachusetts since, and I don't think I ever will.